Good afternoon, everybody. We're just going to wait for some more people to funnel in here, and then we'll get started. Okay, thank you. I think we've got most people in that are attending this afternoon. So welcome to our virtual open house today. My name is Jennifer Roberts. I'm the Manager of Strategic Initiatives, Policy and Analysis. With me today is Celeste Kidsymmetry, the Supervisor of Growth Management, and Liam Munnick, who is a planner with the Strategic Initiatives branch within Development Services here at the City of Barrie. We're excited today to give you a presentation on draft 3 of the new zoning bylaw. We just go to the next, thank you. So this afternoon, we're going to begin with a couple quick polls to get to know our audience better. Then we're going to tell you where you can find draft 3 of the zoning bylaw and more information on the project. We're going to briefly touch about generally what a zoning bylaw is, how to read and navigate the new draft, a user guide that's available. We are going to do a general overview of the new zone categories, the guiding principles of the document, and review of select zoning standards. We're going to wrap up the session discussing next steps with the project and how to provide comments or get more information. And we will try to address as many questions as possible. Today, we're going to be using the chat function in Zoom to allow you to ask any questions you may have during the presentation. We do have staff moderating the questions in the background. You can find the chat button at the bottom of your Zoom screen. And just to let you know that if we do receive any site-specific questions, we're going to try to address those offline this afternoon. So we'll be in touch with any site-specific questions. So now we're going to jump in and launch the poll. So the first poll is we'd really like to get to know our audience a bit better today. So can you tell us a bit about who you are? So once the poll comes up, you'll have the option of selecting whether you're a resident, a developer, a planner, a consultant, or other. There we go. Thank you. Just wait a minute to let everybody answer. Great, that looks good. So we can see the results. So we have about 50% of people today, 56% are residents, and then it's about an equal split between developers / planning consultants, and then we have some other folks joining us today. So that's great. Thank you all for coming. Our second poll, we're just interested to hear about how you heard about the open house today, whether you received our brochure, if you saw the billboards we have around town, social media, or whether or not there's another option, whether or not a friend told you about the meeting or what have it. So if you could answer that question for us, it would be appreciated. Great. So it's about 50% of you saw our mail out, which is amazing. And then other was 50% other. And then about a split between our billboards around town and social media. Also, we've been at some pop-up events around town. We were at the farmers market last weekend, and you'll probably see us downtown at a couple events this weekend as well. So staff are out chatting with people and trying to get the word out about the new draft. And our third question today is, what are you most interested in learning about today? Just wait for that poll to pop up. Perfect, thank you. So we have whether you're interested in our residential zones, more of our employment commercial zones, parking standards, the general standards section of the zoning bylaw, or just generally the overall zoning changes. Perfect. So we can share the results there. So, excuse me, as we suspected, a lot of people are interested in the residential zoning component of things, as well as sort of the overall zoning changes. And then it's about a three-way tie between the general standards, parking, and employment and commercial zones. So we'll be touching on all of those today. So we can stop sharing the polls. Thank you all for participating. Okay, great. Next is generally what a zoning bylaw is. So every incorporated city or town in Ontario has a zoning bylaw. It's a tool through which cities implement their vision for community development. A zoning bylaw is one of the most used local planning tools. It's a document that regulates the use of land and the location and building and structures on a property. The zoning bylaw is created in support of a city's official plan. Barrie's official plan was approved in May by the province, and we are required within 3 years of adopting our official plan to create a new zoning bylaw to aid in implementing the plan. Our zoning bylaw includes general standards that apply to all lands within the city, zone-specific standards, as well as a section on parking requirements, and then we also have the zoning map. So we're going to talk about all of those today. Next slide, please. How to read and understand a zoning bylaw. First, you need to know the zoning of a property. And to do this, you'll need to locate the property on the zoning map, as seen on the left-hand side of the slide. We also have an online mapping tool available where you can search an address and identify the zoning of any property within Barrie. I will demonstrate then the interactive map on the next slide. We're encouraging people to get to know your zone and get to know the zoning in your neighborhood. Zoning informs how neighborhoods form and are shaped. Knowing the zoning of the property next door, where you work, or where you go to school will give you an understanding of how things may or may not change over time. So Megan is going to pull up the interactive map for us. So the link can be found on the Building Barrie /zoning webpage, where you can find all relevant documents related to draft 3 of the zoning bylaw. You can click OK to that first slide. You're going to use the magnifier on the top left of the screen and search for your any address within the city of Barrie. We're going to search for 2 Grove Street. And as Megan's typing there, the addresses will populate. You can pick the address from the drop-down list and zoom into the property. You can also just pan around the map as well if you like, but in this case, we're going to search for a particular property. So if you click on the property if you're interested in, it's going to pop up a window that tells you the zoning, and on the left side of the screen is the in effect current zoning bylaw. So currently in our zoning bylaw today, this property is zoned residential apartment dwelling first density, or RA1. And if we look on the right side of the screen and click it on the new proposed zoning, you'll see that this property is now proposed to be zoned mid-rise 2 or MR2. And there are links to the PDF of the proposed zoning bylaw from this map as well. So you can use that link to get the PDF of draft 3. And you can see all the different zones on the maps are color coded based on their zone. On the top right, you can also open a legend that'll show you the all of the colors and what they mean. That's on the in effect zoning, and on the other side you have the proposed zoning. So encourage everybody to visit the interactive map or use the PDF web map of the zoning map to know your zone. The next slide, I'm going to highlight that we did publish a user guide that has been created to go alongside the zoning bylaw. This is a quick 5-page document to help you navigate the bylaw. The draft zoning bylaw is a new type of document for Barrie. And as we move away from a more traditional bylaw to one that's form-based, the user guide will aid people in understanding how to use the new zoning bylaw. In addition to the user guide, it informs you about the basics around zoning and gives you an overview of the draft bylaw. And it will remind you how to locate the zoning of a property you're interested in. Essentially, all of the information I've provided thus far is included in the user guide for easy reference. The guide is linked on this slide and can be found on the Building Barrie website. I'm going to hand it over to Liam now to dive into the zone-specific standards.
Thanks very much, Jen. Good afternoon, everyone. Um, with a new zoning bylaw comes new zone categories. So the proposed new zoning bylaw has actually reduced the number of zone categories that we currently have in the in effect zoning bylaw. But these zone categories and what has been proposed, as you'll see on the slide, are all being informed by the Barrie official plan land use designations. You'll see that we have a land use designation that might say neighborhood area. That has translated into zone categories such as neighborhood area low 1, 2, and 3, our neighborhood commercial and neighborhood intensification areas. You'll also see a new land use category, the strategic and economic employment district, or SEED land use designation. That has translated into our strategic employment cluster zone and strategic employment district zone. Some terminology changes you'll notice. Our residential areas are what we're calling our neighborhood areas in the zoning bylaw. And our traditionally institutional uses or areas like a rec center or community hub are now being called, in fact, a community hub zone within the new bylaw. We expect to see the vast majority of the city to be rezoned into a neighborhood zone to accommodate our existing areas where residents live. We are also expecting to see our more commercial centers in the city translate to the commercial district zone. You'll see that on the mapping along Bayfield Street and in areas along Mapleview Drive. And you'll see the strategic employment zones within Dunlop Street West and in and around Georgian College and the hospital. The zone categories are meant to inform the land use designations of the official plan. And so you will see on an official plan map, a land use designation. We can only locate the applicable zone category that it relates to or is translating that information into the zoning bylaw. Next slide, please. In creating the zoning bylaw, well, yes, being informed by the city's official plan, and it is our guiding tool in implementing that official plan, we also had some guiding principles endorsed by City Council. One of those guiding principles is affordability and the affordability of homes within the city. A way that we've approached that in creating the new bylaw has been by permitting additional building types across all zones. We've relaxed certain zone standards, such as setbacks or lot coverage requirements, to become more permissive to additional homes being built. And everything we've done in expanding a building type, in relaxing a zone standard, and in permitting additional building types across different zones for residential uses that you may not otherwise expect to see a residential use or may not in the current bylaw, we have all done in an effort to promote or at least be permissible to additional housing being built. We are also looking at creating compact communities. In doing this, we've included in the zoning bylaw permissions for more mixed use development. We also have certain areas of the city where the zoning bylaw is requiring mixed use development to occur. We're allowing for higher density developments in certain areas. These are areas that will align with the Barrie official plan, such as intensification corridors, the downtown or the urban growth center, in and around transit station areas, and in identified strategic growth areas. But we've also included certain zone standards around community design to ensure that while in creating compact communities, we're also creating complete and desirable communities. And some of these standards include floor plate restrictions or size limitations, podium length requirements, and a window to wall ratio. We were also taking into consideration the appropriate transition between taller buildings or higher density zone categories to smaller or lower scale neighborhoods that may exist today. So we did look at our map and at our zone categories and consider where we could put certain zones to allow for this transition. One of the ways we've done this is by including an urban transition zone along the periphery of the urban growth center, but also through requiring an angular plane applied to certain building types across the city, regardless of where you're putting that building type, when they are adjacent to a neighborhood low zone. And that's to ensure the building height and building massing is appropriately transitioning down to that more lower scale neighborhood low area. And finally, we've sought to modernize parking standards. So within the City of Barrie, we are still including in our zoning bylaw regulations around the location, the size, and the number of parking spaces required for a certain use or building type. Parking has been reconfigured though on a district basis. So we have put districts, which are just geographic areas of the city, to associate with a parking rate or rates depending on the use or building type you would seek to locate within that parking district. Primarily, this is for development and redevelopment of property. We've also included minimum and maximum parking rate requirements. A maximum parking rate requirement is new for a City of Barrie zoning bylaw. As well, we are including standards around bicycle parking, which is new for us, and EV charging spaces. Next slide, please. So this afternoon, we would like to go through a couple key topics, and I think through the polls, there are a few people here who will be interested in this list. We picked these because this is what we've heard already the most about and have had the most questions around, but these are also really key sections of the new document. So I'm going to go through in a little bit more detail. I'm afraid it is a lot of information to take in one go, but we're going to go through the general standards. We're going to go through the parking section. I'll go into the neighborhood zone section, which I think is the most applicable for the average resident of Barrie, but also our commercial districts and employment zones, our community hub zones, and the urban zones, which are all within our urban growth center. Next slide, please. Thank you. So general standards. The general standards section is quite a large section within the drafted document. We've included a separate table of contents to help guide users of the document into locating exactly the standard or provision they're looking to understand. Within that table of contents and the general provisions, we've included subheadings. Those subheadings include accessory buildings and structures. So expect to find standards around a detached or attached garage in a neighborhood low zone, perhaps around a deck or a garden shed. That's where you're likely going to see the accessory buildings and standards subsection. We have general building standards, which are going to be standards applying to building types, but applying to building types commonly, regardless of what zone you're putting them in. So this is where you'll see the standards around angular plane and transition. But you'll also find building step backs and certain building step backs here and podium requirements, which are new to the Barrie bylaw. General standards is kind of our catch-all for everything else. You'll find permitted encroachments on all zones here, but also you'll find prohibited uses across the whole of the city here. And then specific use standards, where our general building standards are specific to a building type, but commonly applied. This is specific to a permitted use, but commonly applied wherever that use is permitted. So then a good example for this is a home occupation. That's where you'll find home occupation standards here. If you're looking to operate a home-based business, that doesn't change regardless of what zone you might be operating with it within. So there are common standards we've grouped together here. In reviewing this bylaw, and I believe the user guide will stress this as well, our general standards section will be very important to consider each time you're looking at a specific parcel or perhaps a specific zone category, because it does apply citywide in most cases. If we could go to the next slide, please. Parking is also in a separate section of the bylaw. It's going to be located in section 4 of the draft. Parking has generally been reduced across the parking districts, the rate of required parking spaces, I should say, and it has been reorganized, as I already mentioned. Parking District 1 is located in and around our major transit station areas. This was a change we recently made to align with provincial direction and does where we cannot provide a minimum parking rate. So you'll see not applicable in that column. But then parking district 2 is in and around the urban growth center. You'll see the lowest parking rates here. And then generally, as we go from parking districts 2 through to 5, those rates are increasing as we are moving geographically out from the center or the downtown of the city. Parking District 4 is unique because it applies to our employment areas. So the calculation of parking spaces required for an industrial use or an industrial office use is a little different than for residents. And that's where you'll still see a use-specific parking rate applied. Oh, thank you very much. Thanks. Just to end with parking, if you don't mind going back. Thank you. Parking District 5, it is identified as all other lands within the city. And these are the highest parking rates where we're still anticipating most people will require or need to use vehicles to navigate the city or won't have access to other transportation options. So that's where you'll see the highest parking rates. If you don't mind moving to the next slide, please. Thank you. So our neighborhood zones. Our neighborhood zones are going to be one of the larger areas zoned, one of the larger areas of the city. Neighborhood zones, we've separated into 6 zone categories. That includes neighborhood low 1, 2, and 3, neighborhood mid-rise, neighborhood commercial, and neighborhood intensification. They are going to be predominantly located in areas of existing residential communities within the city and newly planned residential communities. And neighborhood low 1, 2, and 3 is what I would call reflects some of the least dense zoning, that category that we have in this proposed bylaw. But it mostly is going to reflect that existing community area. Neighborhood commercial is a new zone to accommodate those local or more community-centered commercial plazas. And neighborhood mid-rise, you won't see very much on the map. We've used it in certain spaces to really accommodate more medium density or mid-rise building, mostly around development and redevelopment opportunities. But neighborhood intensification, you should expect to see along our intensification corridors, such as Essa Road or Yonge Street. And those have been identified through the Barrie official plan. So consistently, the documents are working together, the official plan informing the city zoning bylaw. The neighborhood low zones specifically have been organized spatially. So neighborhood low 1 is to be located on local roads. Neighborhood low 2 would be located on collector roads, and neighborhood low 3 would be located on arterial roads. And we've done this to try and identify existing structures of communities and layout of existing residential communities, but also to continue to allow for that community structure in our planned areas as well. We are also moving away from more exclusionary zoning measures that are found in the current bylaw. And this has been done, most recently, this has been done through the citywide amendment for 4 dwelling units as of right on residentially zoned lands. But we're also looking, as you can see on the screen, expanding the building types applicable within neighborhood zones. You might expect to find a detached house, a coach house, a semi-attached house, a row house, which we are calling, commonly are called townhomes, as well as potentially a low-rise apartment up to 4 stories. Next slide, please. Our commercial district zones. We're going to have 2 proposed commercial district zones in the new bylaw. We have Commercial District 1 and we have Commercial District 2. You'll see Commercial District 2 used, I think, most often on the map. It's going to be along Bayfield Street and is going to be properties such as the Bayfield Mall or the Georgian Mall, areas where our commercial and retail opportunities or uses are really centered. But you're also going to find Commercial District 2 in and around Mapleview Drive and the 400 Highway area in the south end of town. Commercial districts are there to permit a variety of commercial uses, a variety of retail uses, some office uses, but also in this document will permit mixed use redevelopment opportunities. So potentially including a residential use with at-grade shopping or retail opportunities or office spaces. However, within the commercial districts, we are still requiring that a percentage of the ground floor area of a new building or redeveloped building will maintain a commercial use. The commercial district is not meant to lose that use. It is meant to include it and allow for that mixed use opportunity to occur where appropriate. One of the major differences, and you'll note the building forms on the screen, but one of the major differences between Commercial District 1 and Commercial District 2 is the building types permitted. So Commercial District 1 will permit building types up to the mid-rise building, so a flex building and a mid-rise building. Commercial District 2 will permit all of those building types, including the high-rise building. Now, those are what we're calling those building types. That's not to say heights of those buildings are getting much taller. They are still considered and still regulated through the zone section for commercial district. Next slide, please. Our employment area zones. So with our employment zones, we are actually following pretty closely here to the official plan land use designations. There's the 3 land use designations that are translating directly into 3 employment zones. Our employment zones are meant to locate within the existing identified Barrie official plan employment areas. They're there to permit the stable, reliable, and diverse employment opportunities, but also aligning with the direction of policy in the Barrie official plan and aligning with provincial direction around employment areas. We have 3 zones proposed for the employment areas, being employment non-industrial, employment industrial, and then employment restricted industrial. You'll likely see the employment industrial zoned lands, and you can see it on the screen here, to include uses like warehousing or manufacturing, with some opportunity for accessory retail and commercial spaces, as well as some accessory office opportunities. And I say accessory to mean those are additional uses permitted when they are coordinated with or in support of a primary industrial use. Employment non-industrial uses are where you're mostly see that mix of small scale industrial uses with office uses, and again, a limited range of maybe institutional or retail commercial uses permitted by the bylaw. And then finally, the employment restricted zone is a zoning that you won't see much of on the map because it's a zone category with created with the intention that it is zoned into by way of an application, so that there can be additional study or review, because potentially these are uses that require not only the City of Barrie to review and approve, but also other agencies. Building types permitted in employment zones are the flex buildings and low-rise buildings as well. Next slide, please. Our community hub zones. So our community hub zones are what likely today we can understand as the institutional zoning. These are areas where you'll find existing schools or recreation or community facilities, places of worship or public libraries. They're areas with a community center, with the economic and kind of social benefits of creating that community center in mind, but they're also still going to allow for that mixed use opportunity. So we're permitting a mix of uses with community hubs. Similar to commercial district, we don't want to lose that community specific permission. So this is all done in a accessory to, I should say, excuse me, accessory to community uses, but it could include an institutional use such as a childcare center, a recreation facility with perhaps a retail component. There is opportunity through the draft bylaw for residential uses in addition to a community hub zone. So we are expecting a mix of uses to occur there. You will predominantly see land zoned community hub neighborhood because that's where most of our existing centers, public libraries, places of worship are today. But then we also have created community hub urban for our urban growth center. And that's where we expect to see a mix of uses with residential. Perhaps if there's a residential apartment tower going in, they will require community hub urban zoning and allow for an urban school or a childcare center to locate within the existing building. Again, going back to that guiding principle of creating more compact communities. Some of the building types permitted in the community hub zone include flex buildings and mid-rise buildings and low-rise buildings. Flex and low-rise buildings are permitted in the community hub neighborhood, I believe, with the mid-rise permitted in the urban zone. And next slide, please. Thank you. And so finally, our urban zones. This is, I think, pretty understandably, the urban growth center. This is downtown Barrie. This is where we do expect to see the highest forms of development. We will have two urban zones proposed, urban core and urban transition. As you can see on the screen, the urban transition zone has been used around the periphery of the urban growth center, but still within that urban growth center. And then the urban core, you can see is being really within the center of Barrie. The urban core and urban transition zones are both going to be permissive to the widest range of uses. They're also going to act to promote mixed use developments to occur here. With urban core, the tallest building being a high-rise building is capped at this time in the proposed bylaw at 25 stories, but there is always the potential by way of an amendment or through additional study or review that might get taller. That was done to align with the policies of the Barrie official plan. Our urban center or urban growth center is also where we have the most transit supportive opportunities, the most active transportation opportunities for residents. And so that's where we do expect to see the highest densities to occur. And I'll move things on to Celeste with our final few slides. Thank you.
Thank you, Liam, and thanks everyone. I think you've been kind of getting my notes finally after I figured out how to share them with everyone and not just myself. So after this, thank you for the presentation, Liam. I hope that did answer some of the comments and questions in the chat as well. But I will go through those as we go through this question and answer session after the presentation. So I just wanted to also let you know that this is not the last time you'll have an opportunity to participate in the zoning bylaw review. So there is a formal public meeting on October 1st in the council chambers at City Hall. It's at 6 o'clock. You can register to speak at cityclerks@barrie.ca. You can also use that email address if you would like to attend virtually. So you are able to connect virtually on Zoom if you would like to comment. And if you're here in person, then you're able to actually just come up to the mic when you're called. It's an open forum. Everyone has a few minutes to speak, and it's chaired by the chair of the Affordability Committee. And it is streamed live on our YouTube channel as well, the City of Barrie YouTube channel. So you can either watch it live or you can watch it at a later date as well. And then you can provide any written comments up until we're looking to provide people until October 4th to provide any detailed written comments to our website or our email address at newzoningbylaw@barrie.ca. And next slide, please. Or is that the last slide? Apologies. Here are all of our contact information. Celeste Symmetry is myself. Liam is the one who has just done the presentation. Jen also participated in the presentation and gave all of the introductory statements. And then there is our Executive Director, Michelle Banfield, who is also here on the call and can be used as a resource for the zoning team as we try to answer all of your questions. So in the chat, we've had a few questions with regards to further explaining what differences between the neighborhood low zones is. And I can start to describe that in terms of just it depends on the type of road your property is actually fronting on. There are different standards depending on how much traffic is able to be generated for the amount of units and access to transit and service infrastructure of all kinds. And what I can do is perhaps, Liam, if you can bring up um, the the page in the explainer for that section.
I might have to ask Megan to do that just because I'm
I
not
was just
actively
sorry.
sharing my screen. But thanks. Thanks, Megan.
Thanks, Megan. Sorry about that. So as you can see, there are differences in the neighborhood area low in terms of different standards for height, the type of units, and it depends on the type of road you're on. Am I missing anything specific, do you think, Liam, in terms of what might help people understand the difference between the three zones?
No, I mean, I think you've captured it how we mapped it. It was
Mhm.
mapped spatially, how you described. You would also expect to find when you look at the sections themselves, neighborhood low 1, 2, and 3. Neighborhood low 1 will have more increased setbacks, um, increased lot area coverage. Still, a variety of building forms are permitted, but you'll see the standards relating to the neighborhood area low 1 really larger. And then as we get into neighborhood low 2, those standards are a little bit more reduced, but still understanding the scale of what we expect to see or what we already do see in our neighborhood low areas. And the neighborhood low 3, there is a specific building type permitted around a row house configuration. And the expectation is neighborhood low 3 would have really one access from an arterial and will be quite specific to the building type that's permitted there. So again, it's done spatially, but those are a few details into each of those neighborhood low zones that are different between them.
Okay. Thank you very much, Liam. There was also a question about whether or not the type of mid-rise development that's permitted in the urban transition zone. And I know Liam mentioned about how that is around the urban core area, and it is to transition some of the more complex building types, commercial uses, mix of uses to a neighborhood low, more residential area that has the different built forms. I'm going to call on Jordan Lambie quickly to kind of give an explanation about why we have the urban transition zone.
Hi there, yeah, it's great. So the urban transition zone, much to following on kind of what Celeste was mentioning, was acting as a little bit of a buffer between some of the higher density and taller building standards that are permitted in the urban core zone, and between kind of what's on the other side of the urban growth center, which in most often cases is kind of a neighborhood low or neighborhood area kind of condition. So it is to create some transition to those more established areas. There were also, I think, some questions in there about, what building types are permitted. We do have standards in the general provisions of the document related to transition that speak to low-rise buildings, row housing, and like multi-unit forms of development that are permitted for existing structures and converting existing single-family homes, for example, into multiplexes and things like that. But on the whole, in the urban transition, in an effort to efficiently use those lands for kind of the growth that we expect long term, even beyond the horizons of this plan, we would like to see kind of that mid-rise development occurring in urban transition. And then I also think, just while we're on the transition topic, Celeste, if it's okay, I did see another question in there about angular plane, which I'd kind of like to address. I think they go kind of in tandem as they're both in the same section. And I believe the comment noted that that municipalities and a lot of the political and professional kind of conversations around transition in the past have centered around the concept of a 45-degree angular plane. How that is applied and measured and where is kind of key to that conversation. So, the city wasn't necessarily looking to throw the baby out with the bathwater, so to speak, but really think about how it gets applied to the city and where. So I was mentioning, like, it really only applies where zones that are permitted for mid and high-rise buildings are abutting or adjacent to a neighborhood area that gets applied. And there's also kind of some relaxations of that plane for the first 4 stories. So, for example, if you're adjacent to a neighborhood area that has a 3-story house or townhouse on it, you could build up to 4 stories that breaks through that angular plane, but anything above that would need to start to transition away from the existing neighborhood. So there was just some contextual considerations, and that is further explored through section 3. I think it's 3.2. If you would like to take a further look, and otherwise, I'm happy to answer any other questions too.
Thanks very much, Jordan. Actually, I'm going to put you on the spot one more time.
Sure.
We do have another question related to architectural constraints. So the question has come in, what about all the architectural constraints we have been hearing that will limit the creative and different architectural approaches to new development?
I'm not sure I understand the question. Architectural restrictions in terms of, like, are we talking setbacks or? Not quite sure. And sorry, is it in the chat, Celeste? I can
It is in the chat. So why don't we kind of phrase it differently, and we'll see whether or not that is something that we can address by, you did talk about the angular plane, so perhaps it's related more to that as well. But there are constraints as far as what types of built form and height can locate where. So can you speak to that just in generalities as to why we
in
have
terms of building
things
types?
like,
Yeah. And again, they're often context specific, but we're following the community structure of the official plan, the anticipated densities and heights that were permitted through that document, and the growth management kind of strategies that were the foundation of that. There are considerations in terms of restrictions. Again, they are transition based, and that was a council endorsed principle of the zoning bylaw. So we needed to kind of come up with some standards that created those transitions. For example, in commercial districts where we're anticipating some mid-rise development, but again, maybe adjacent to neighborhood areas, we do permit row house form, like ground related, and I believe it's ground oriented development as defined in this bylaw. There are permissions to allow for that type of development in those contexts, so that these newer developments can integrate with existing neighborhoods. And of course, the zoning bylaw, I would say, is a universal document, and there are always site specific exceptions where a variance or other considerations may be required, and staff's always happy to facilitate those conversations. You're on mute, Celeste. Sorry. Are you locked into mute? Oh, there we go.
I was. And
Okay.
that would be something that a lot of people would be quite happy about. I will say that too. But so thank you very much for all of that, Jordan. I very much appreciate it. And there was a bit of an update in the chat, and the resident was actually talking about more about materials and colors, etc. And I know that we have urban design guidelines that also have been released with the zoning bylaws. So I'm sure that they would
Yeah.
speak to that more than the actual zoning bylaw.
Yeah, the zoning bylaw doesn't really, other than some window to wall ratios for building energy performance and bird-friendly design, there really isn't much in terms of architectural control. And that has been kind of the direction from the province as well to municipalities through changes to the Planning Act and municipalities' ability to kind of require materials. So there is less emphasis on materiality and kind of methods of construction, and more focus on form and building massing and kind of community structure.
Okay, that's great. Thank you very much for that. We had a quick question as well. Do you support the use, like the conversion of low-rise buildings into a low-rise apartment building? And I can speak to that in terms of course, we're always looking for redevelopment opportunities that are going to more effectively use lands within the city. So it really would be done on a site-specific basis. But I think I can speak for staff when we're always looking to use properties in the most effective way possible to service the community. So there is that one. And I also had someone ask if we can speak to what we might see around the MTSA areas, which are the major transit station areas. And they actually will probably show the most change in the city in my view. We will be looking for a lot of density to service the transit that we have available in the city. That's also getting paired with the two different GO stations that we have. So we're looking to service our population in the best way possible with active transportation alternatives as well as transit alternatives. So I anticipate that we're going to see a lot of height and density in and around these areas. And we do have applications that represent that change in land use as well. And then let's see what else we have here. Someone would like additional detail about the neighborhood intensification zone. And I'm not sure whether that means standards or just the basic principles. I believe, Liam, you mentioned it in your slide, but if you can just kind of give a few quick points on where and how the neighborhood intensification zone is intended to be used.
Of course. So you'll find the neighborhood intensification zone along identified intensification corridors. Those have been identified in the Barrie official plan, but you're also only going to find this zone where we have an intensification corridor and a corresponding official plan land use of neighborhood area. So there are other land use designations in the official plan along intensification corridors, mostly around our strategic growth areas, so major intersections in the city where we expect to see higher densities or development to occur. Those would not fall under the neighborhood intensification zoning. There's a separate zone category for those areas because it is a little bit more height and density and a little bit more permissive. The neighborhood intensification is really a zone code meant to still accommodate the intent of Barrie official plan policies around intensification corridors, but marry it with the neighborhood area itself, which is our kind of our low rise, low scale existing residential areas. I would still expect you might see, I'll just pull up a couple of building forms here. You still might expect to see in neighborhood intensification, a low rise apartment or a mid rise building, but that would be done, that when if following the proposed standards would be done in such a way to still understand and reflects the neighborhood area it's located in. So not quite as dense or tall as we would expect to see in other parts of the city. I don't know if that helps at all.
I'm sure it does, Liam. So let's see, another question, I hopefully I'm not on mute again, because for some reason my Zoom page keeps disappearing. All I can see is the comments, which is fine. That's what I'm supposed to be doing. There was a comment, when do you expect this bylaw to be passed by City Council? So as I noted previously, we have our formal public meeting on October 1st. And after which time we will be going through all of the comments that we receive, both written and through these presentations and the information that's we hear about the community as we pop up and discuss the zoning bylaw. We'll be reviewing all of that, reviewing the document again, taking everything into consideration. Then we're hoping to, or targeting to come back to council with a staff report and a final version of the zoning bylaw in early 2025. So it really would depend on council schedule, but certainly we're looking at coming in early Q1 of 2025 with a new zoning bylaw for the City of Barrie. Then we have
Celeste, there was just a question about, there was just a question also about the urban design guidelines. So we have sent those out into the world with the zoning bylaw for we did some previous consultation, and we intend to take those to council at the same time for council endorsement with the zoning bylaw.
Absolutely. Thanks, Jen. I was actually going to make Jordan answer it. But that's great. Yes, thank you so much. We will be looking, as Jen said, at bringing the supporting document to, so the zoning bylaw is a standards document to implement the policies of the official plan, and our urban design guidelines are going to feed into supporting how those standards are implemented across the city as well. So it's great that we're able to bring them forward at the same time and share those with the community. I have a question with regards to setbacks from EP zones. And it may be a bit specific for what we're going to discuss here today, but in general, we do want planting buffers within landscape areas around all of our projects to ensure that we have at least a bit of landscape cover for infiltration, to allow for trees to be planted, to help with the urban heat island effect. And ultimately, obviously, those things do help with the built form and how they respond to both heat and cold, and the amount of services that are needed to keep your home, for example, at a consistent temperature. The 3-meter planting buffer is generally due to allow for that. And EP zones have buffers, obviously, to protect the feature that's been identified, but the buffer is to ensure that there's no disturbance of the feature. So the buffer within the EP area is intended to protect the feature, not to be the boundary of the development project. So I hope that kind of answers that question, Trish. And certainly we can respond to it in more detail if you wish, and you can always direct message us as well. Did I say or request that someone goes into the neighborhood intensification zones in more detail?
Yes.
All right, thank you. I think there's more than one question about that. There was also a question about support, or no, we already said that. We have some questions about parking. I don't know who might want to tackle that. I don't want to keep putting you on the spot, Liam, but maybe I'll get you to tackle whether or not we have specific parking standards for different types of use. I can say that we no longer have them in District 1, which I believe is the major transit station areas. But there's also different variations of parking standards that are going to be applied to the different uses throughout the city. And one specific question is related to how that would relate to affordable housing. So certainly if you're able to comment in a bit more detail about parking, that would be greatly appreciated.
Yes, of course. So parking under section 4, there will be tables in section 4 identifying the permitted or the required minimum and maximum rates for parking spaces to be provided. We have included, they're not like a traditional bylaw, they're not going to be specific to like each individual use. We've grouped certain uses together that made the most sense, and we've included them as rows. And then there will be like a dwelling unit will have a different rate from a commercial or retail store, that sort of thing. So that is still in the tables, but they've been greatly grouped together into more common terms. And then the rates will be different depending on the district you're located within. So we're doing it based off of a group together rate and based off of where you're located within the city. Now, District 1, as Celeste mentioned, is in around of our transit stations, and we know our direction on what we can and what we can't essentially do there. District 2 is our downtown, our urban growth center area. So expect to find the least amount of parking required there. District 3 is our strategic growth areas and intensification corridors. So gradually increasing in the required rates for a dwelling unit, let's say, in the table, but also gradually increasing in the requirements for potentially another use. District 4 is our employment areas, which I kind of spoke to quickly in my presentation just because they are unique. So the industrial uses, that sort of thing, do require a different understanding or calculation for parking. So that has been included in this table. And then District 5 is all other lands, and it will be the highest rates required for parking. We did, in a previous version of the drafted zoning bylaw, include certain rates around affordable housing opportunities and redevelopment opportunities. That has been revised in this document and removed simply because we cannot zone for people, and we can't always confirm what the tenanted use of a building will be in relation to a parking rate. That's not really something a zoning bylaw can get into. So it's not to say there wouldn't be the opportunity for other configurations of parking, like a shared parking lot, as example. We do have standards in there now for shared parking across multiple properties, off-site parking. We actually have allowances to reduce your parking in certain areas that way. I believe we also have an allowance for a mix of uses to occur still in the draft. So parking is an interesting section just because of how much it has changed from our current bylaw. But we are still considering certain uses to have a specific parking minimum required rate, but they're greatly grouped together just to be more consolidated in the table. Thanks.
Great.
I hope that answers the questions list.
I hope so too. Thanks very much, Liam. So we're actually coming close, like within a minute of our of the time frame we've allotted for the virtual meeting. If your questions haven't been answered either by the discussion or through the chat, please feel free to continue to reach out to staff. We have our own email address, as I mentioned earlier, new zoning bylaw at barrie.ca. Always check out the buildingbarrie.ca page. There's not just this project, but all of the development services projects that are going on throughout the city have sites on there that you can check out to get new information. And oh, it's actually 4:15. My apologies. So there's a good question in here that a staff representative, our staff representative that actually is the affordable housing guru on our team. She's not actually on the call today, but perhaps who could I target with talking about affordable housing? Jen, would you be able to do a quick review about affordable housing and how that applies in the zoning bylaw and how the other programs that and policy bases that we have actually contribute to making affordable housing in the city?
Right. I was going to reach out to this person directly. There's a lot of other great resources on our city's website on housing, specifically affordable housing, our new community improvement plan that defines affordable housing. We have an affordable housing bulletin that speaks to the prices for both rental and ownership properties, but the zoning bylaw really isn't a place for affordable housing discussions per se. So we have policies in the OP, we have a community improvement plan, and we now have a housing program we're kicking off. So I would direct you towards the City of Barrie website to get some more information, and I can send those. I can have our affordable housing senior planner reach out directly to provide some more specific details on the price purchases, the affordable rental affordable rentals, the price for those, as well as the affordable purchase price. We do have everybody's emails that registered as well, so we are able to reach out directly that ways.
Absolutely. Okay, as I mentioned, for some reason, I can no longer see the Zoom screen, just the chat. And now the chat has also disappeared. So that's a me problem, not a you problem, but I can't see anyone's faces. The further questions, one of them was related to affordable housing, as I said. And okay. So I'm sorry, Jen,
That's
can
okay.
I ask you
Yeah.
to,
I can
can't
jump in
see
here.
anything now. I'm
Yeah.
very, very sorry, everybody. Celeste has technical difficulties often.
So we do have a general question about how the zones have been determined, what's the for proposed new zones, and who or what body has determined them. So I'll address that as our final question. I think a lot of the other questions are really specific to certain sites, and we can get back to people directly on those. So the team in front of you are really the ones that have sort of assigned these new proposed zones. But that being said, this is really all based on the approved official plan that designates that identifies the designations of lands. And there's policies in the OP that speak to permitted heights, built forms, where we should see intensification. So we're implementing the structure that's within the OP through these zoning standards and using our current zoning standards and general updated practices and what we're seeing across other municipalities as a starting point on having these conversations around what should the side yard setback be, what should the backyard setback be. And we realize that there's going to be things that we don't have 100% correct in this draft, and we are welcome to hearing from people what you think needs to change. And that is a really important part of the next step in terms of providing comments, possible solutions and feedback to what were proposed, things that may or may not work for you or your development. And we're going to take all of that information back, and we're going to spend a couple months being really busy going through comments and working through to make sure we have everything aligned, so that the zoning works for everybody. So with that, I think I'll wrap it up for us today. Thank you all so much for joining us. Again, our contact information is here. You will find the slides to this presentation posted on the Building Barrie website, hopefully tomorrow, as well as a recording of this presentation. And the Building Barrie site will be updated going forward. And we hope to see some of you at the public meeting on October 1st at Council Chambers.
So I just want to add one quick thing.
For sure.
Now that I came back, you saw me probably looking scared a little bit, but there was another question about how the zoning bylaw is formally processed and the process for us in this review. So once, just to confirm, again, there is a public meeting that's going to happen on October 1st. And after that time, we're reviewing all the comments, and we will come forward to council for them to decide on whether or not the version of the zoning bylaw that we present to them is what should be approved. And then there'll be an opportunity for that decision to be ratified by a bylaw. And there is the standard appeal period under the Planning Act that would apply for anyone who has significant concerns with what has been approved by council, as recommended by staff. So yes, feel free to have any, send any additional questions to us for comment, and hopefully we have addressed many of your concerns today. Okay.
Great, thank you.